Tonight, Doug Ford fights a summons to testify after apparently declining to talk voluntarily.
You know, that's really the missing piece.
Why the Emergencies Act Commission took drastic action. In a country desperate for stability, Britain's ruling party gets yet another new leader.
I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together.
And Susan Ormiston travels to the heart of a critical ecosystem under threat.
The whole world depends on the Amazon rainforest staying intact.
This is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. Tonight, a legal battle is brewing at the federal inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act. The Ontario government says it will challenge in court a summons for Premier Doug Ford to testify. The order came today from the commission looking into the use of the act to end last winter's convoy protests. It says it was forced to issue a summons to Ford and to Ontario's former Solicitor General Sylvia Jones after repeated requests to participate were simply refused. Rafi Boudjikanian walks us through the move, the response, and the wider reaction to a dramatic development.
As the inquiry into the use of the Emergencies Act continues, assertions by Ontario's Premier have again come under question, this time about whether he would testify.
How come, Premier Ford, you're not testifying at this inquiry? Were you asked? Did you decline?
I have not been asked.
But the commission has now officially summoned him after it says he declined multiple requests to do so voluntarily. It says that in September it asked both Ford and Deputy Premier Sylvia Jones for an interview, but that request was refused. It renewed the request a number of times. It then requested they testify voluntarily, but that was declined by the province for the moment. The Ontario government says it will challenge the summons in court, arguing it violates parliamentary privilege. All this follows another seeming contradiction last week.
I stood shoulder to shoulder with the Prime Minister.
But records of conversations between Justin Trudeau and then Mayor Jim Watson show they believed Ford was hiding for political reasons. The summons follows a request of the commission from 3 different lawyers.
The Commission of Inquiry has a mandate to get at the truth of what happened in February. So the fact that the province of Ontario would go this far to ensure that the Premier and that former Solicitor General Jones don't have to appear in person and give evidence is quite striking. It's disappointing.
Others stress the need to have the province appear at the inquiry at a political, not just policing level.
Those 3 weeks in February were very traumatizing for the people of Ottawa, and they felt very abandoned and let down by all 3 levels of government. We do have Mayor Watson who's appeared, and the Prime Minister will be appearing later, and that's really the missing piece.
Rafi, when it comes to the commission itself, there were some new details today about the head of the RCMP and her position on whether the Emergencies Act was needed.
Adrienne, it turns out that just hours before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kicked in the Emergencies Act on February 14th, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki wrote an email to a senior public safety official saying that in her opinion, not all legal options had been exhausted, though she did find the act could be useful. Now, that's not a very different position than what we've been hearing from the Ontario Provincial Police so far, and no doubt likely to come up when Lucki herself testifies.
All right, Rafi Boudjikanian in Ottawa, thank you as always.
You're welcome.
Now, tonight, results are coming in across Ontario after province-wide municipal elections. In the city of Ottawa, longtime broadcaster Mark Sutcliffe has won the race to replace Jim Watson as mayor. In the city of Toronto, John Tory has been re-elected for his 3rd term as mayor, and results are also in from nearby Brampton.
Perfect day, it's sunny, it's beautiful. Happy to vote with my wife Genevieve.
Well, that was Patrick Brown earlier today. He's been re-elected as that city's mayor. We are also watching the city of Hamilton, where former Ontario NDP leader Andrea Horwath is running for mayor. Rishi Sunak will be the first person of color to lead the UK, but after making history, his early promise to voters is modest: stability. Sunak will be the country's 3rd prime minister since September. Margaret Evans has his rise and the pitfalls ahead.
Another day, Another prime minister in the United Kingdom. The leadership changes within the governing Conservative Party, whiplash-inducing in recent weeks and months.
Mr. Sunak, can you really unite the party now?
Now, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson's former chancellor, blamed by some for Johnson's downfall, is being touted as a unifier. His was the only name on the ballot. It is an astonishing change of fortune for Sunak.
Who will be our next Prime Minister?
Over the summer, he lost out in a leadership contest to Liz Truss, even though his critique of her economic policies proved prophetic.
That would lead to mortgage rates, interest rates going up to 7%. Can you imagine what that's going to do for everyone here and everyone watching?
Truss is now a footnote of history, drummed out of office by her own MPs. Sunak insists he'll be a healer.
I will make it my utmost priority to bring our party and our country together.
But he inherits a party and a country turned on its head by years of discord in the corridors of power.
6 or 7 years of unprecedented political turmoil with changes of government, with governments unable to govern.
This analyst believes Sunak will still have the shadow of Boris Johnson to grapple with.
There are people within his party who loathe him because of what they think he did to Boris Johnson. In that sense, there are people within his party who want him to fail.
Johnson made a last-minute bid to regain power, returning from holiday to canvass for votes, pulling out over the weekend, a relief for some.
I just think it was chaotic when he was in charge, so I don't want to see that again.
Yeah, I'd rather have Richie back in office.
Better than Boris.
There are too, of course, many people here still clamoring for a general election. Their chance to choose the country's leadership, they say, for a change.
So, Margaret, that's interesting because despite calls from some to go back to the voters, there does seem to be sort of little sign of another election.
That's right, Adrienne. And one of the first things that Rishi Sunak said today in private to his MPs is that he has no intention of calling an early election, so they have another 2 years. But critics would say that if he can't get a handle on the infighting and the divisions that have really paralyzed successive Conservative governments here, then the public pressure to hold a general election could become overwhelming. And opinion polls will tell you if you held it today, the opposition Labour Party would win.
All right, Margaret Evans, outside number 10 Downing. Thanks, Margaret.
You're welcome.
The U.S. Department of Justice announced charges against more than a dozen Chinese agents working in the U.S.
The Justice Department will not tolerate attempts by any foreign power to undermine the rule of law upon which our democracy is based.
2 Chinese intelligence officers were charged for trying to obtain inside information on a U.S. case against a Chinese company, reportedly the telecoms giant Huawei. Others were charged for their involvement in spying and a harassment campaign against a dissident living in the U.S. Now, tonight, 3 locations in the Toronto area are under RCMP investigation for possible illegal actions against Chinese citizens in Canada. The concern is that some service centers meant to help with paperwork might be used to pressure people to return to China. Ithel Musa looks at how wide that concern has become.
The resident of this home in Markham, Ontario, denies having anything to do with Chinese service stations.
It's wrong address. No, don't borrow me again.
According to a report published by human rights group Safeguard Defenders, it's one of dozens of such stations around the world, including 3 in predominantly Chinese neighborhoods in and around Toronto. The RCMP says it's investigating whether criminal activity is taking place. Safeguard Defenders says there is evidence people connected to these service stations have been involved in pressuring some nationals to return to China. According to Chinese state-run media, 230,000 telecom fraud suspects were educated and persuaded to return to China from overseas to confess to crimes from April 2021 to July 2022.
In most countries, we believe, yes, it's a network of individuals rather than thinking of it as a physical address and a physical police station where people will be dragged into.
But some worry dissidents and ethnic minorities will also be targeted.
These stations are another tool that Beijing can use to repress Canadians here in the Chinese community in Canada.
Zhang Shui says she's been harassed online by Chinese officials for her activism.
Now,
the Chinese police station here, just a few kilometers from me. So I am asking myself, where else I can escape to?
The Chinese embassy says for services such as driver's license renewal, it is necessary to have eyesight, hearing, and physical examinations. The main purpose of the service station abroad is to provide free assistance to overseas Chinese citizens in this regard. The Chinese embassy also says the service stations are staffed by volunteers, not police officers or people who conduct criminal investigations. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
Right now, the healthcare staffing crunch being felt across the country is extreme in BC's north. Some places have half their nursing positions unfilled. As Susanna De Silva explains, the Band-Aid solutions they have right now just are not enough.
In many communities in BC's north, if you're looking for a conversation starter, mention healthcare.
There's not enough of anything.
The ambulance service is inconsistent as well.
There was a lot more hands-on 2 years ago.
Fraser Lake resident Dorothy Fitzpatrick's husband has been waiting 2 years for a new knee. Suddenly, there's another holdup.
It was a surprise to me this week to have a referral for annual blood work and be told that the waiting list to have it done is 2 months out. So, that's a new thing.
New numbers from BC's Northern Health Authority highlight the root of the problem. 20% of all healthcare positions are unfilled. In the most remote locations, nursing vacancies are as high as 50%.
People in the north suffer disproportionately when they don't have any kind of service, even basic services.
After more than a decade in nursing, Jeremy Bennett says he's never seen it this bad. The recent drop in staffing levels pushed him out of frontline nursing.
And while I don't expect the same level of healthcare we have in Vancouver, I expect safe care.
The Health Authority covers the northern half of BC with a population of 300,000 people spread out over an area larger than France. Staffing shortages have led to a number of repeated emergency department closures, diverting people hundreds of kilometers away, often forcing patients to pick up the bill for travel and hotels.
It's a mix of anger, sadness, and despair.
A couple of years ago, this orthopedic surgeon operated on patients within about 6 months. Now he tells them he doesn't know how many years it could be. Government numbers show wait times for hip and knee replacements in the north are twice as long as the provincial average. And because of a shortage of primary care doctors and nurses, his patients are showing up in worse condition.
If those are left to fester, that is diabetes, significant arthritis, immobility, generally weakening, their results are poor.
Northern Health says it has been able to fill 90% of its nursing needs through overtime and nurses from outside the region at a greater expense. It's expanding recruiting incentives while the province is adding new medical school spaces. Good steps, but advocates say northern communities need more.
They have unique situations. They need to feel listened to, and they can come up with strategies that could work for their community.
Creative solutions, they say, are needed because people's lives are on the line. Susanna De Silva, CBC News, Prince George.
New testimony from Major General Danny Fortin is under consideration tonight after his sex assault trial resumed. Fortin used a map to suggest anyone could have entered the complainant's unlocked room at the Royal Military College back in 1989, and he used a yearbook to show a fellow student had the same nickname as him. Last month, a woman testified she recognized Fortin as the man who attacked her. Tonight, some climate activists are either drawing praise or just getting people annoyed after a series of hardline publicity stunts involving world-famous paintings. Jayla Bernstein looks into how their activism plays with the public.
Climate activists are taking their protests from the streets to the museums as the next UN climate change conference draws near. Tomato soup versus Van Gogh, mashed potatoes for Monet, and now cake for the king, a wax model of him, that is.
Just stop oil. It's a piece of cake.
The paintings were covered in glass and unharmed, but it was too far for some. One person tweeted, "Not sure that chucking tomato soup at a Van Gogh is going to help the planet."
We're not asking the question, should everybody be throwing soup on paintings? What we're doing is getting the conversation going so we can ask the questions that matter.
And so the activists who are going out there and deciding to
throw food and crazy glue themselves in a public venue do not think that they are basically going to have, the prime minister call them up and say, okay. They don't think that. What they think is that if they're lucky, they'll grab attention and people debate, we'll all debate it on Twitter and the media will talk about it. And a lot of people who care about climate change will watch and think about the message that's behind the tactic.
No, people got places to be.
But does this civil disobedience risk alienating people who already cared about the climate? Research suggests it's unlikely.
They may not support the organization that's deciding to throw soup. They may not support groups that want to block the streets, but they still are going to support the overall, issue.
As the urgency of climate change escalates, even scientists are getting involved at the street level.
I decided that since other attempts to have an impact didn't seem to be having any effect, that maybe I should try civil disobedience. So I joined Extinction Rebellion.
He was arrested and charged, but plans to do it again. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
Fans of the actor Leslie Jordan are remembering him tonight for both his turn on Will and Grace and as a calming pandemic presence.
What are y'all doing? This is awful. It's still March.
The actor posted daily to social media, newfound fans finding comfort in his humor and humanity. He was known for both on set as well during his Emmy-winning run on Will and Grace. According to reports from the celebrity website TMZ, Jordan died in a single-vehicle car crash in Hollywood. He was 67. For Canadians already feeling the squeeze from high inflation, things aren't expected to get better anytime soon.
We're seeing cracks, we're seeing some slowdown, we're seeing consumers be a little more cautious.
How a looming recession could play out in the months ahead. Next. Deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, the stakes have never been higher.
Do you worry what will happen with the election in Brazil coming up?
Absolutely. Susan Ormston and her team take us to the front lines of a battle over climate change. And a little later, an emotional tribute just before takeoff.
Today I saw my teacher from 1990, Miss O'Connell.
A student reunited with her teacher and the thank you she wanted everyone to hear. We're back in 2. Oh no, Saskatchewan. It's looking a lot like winter after parts of your province were hit by an early blast of snow. The storm moved in on Sunday, and in some areas, conditions were so bad roads were closed. According to Environment Canada, Moose Jaw saw up to 40 centimeters of snow, while other regions got up to 20. This week, the Bank of Canada is widely expected to increase interest rates again as it tries to drive down inflation. Rising costs have taken a big bite out of Canadian pockets this year. Transportation costs are up nearly 9%. Food prices up more than 10% on average. In a moment, what the Competition Bureau says it's doing about that. But first, what those rising interest rates might mean for the economy as a whole and how some businesses are preparing for an expected downturn. Kyle Bax has that.
So far this year, the trucking industry is riding high, the booming economy fueling the transport business. Murray Mullen's company is fully staffed but won't hire any more as demand for shipping is starting to slip.
We're seeing cracks, we're seeing some slowdown, we're seeing consumers be a little more cautious right now with their spend. They have to because things cost more.
There are signs across the country the red-hot economy is cooling down. The stock market has fallen by almost 11% so far this year. The real estate market is sputtering, with average prices falling almost 7% in the last year and the number of sales plunging more than 32%. The economy was sizzling to start the year, but since the spring, growth is basically stalled amid consecutive interest rate hikes, continued inflation pressure, and a labor shortage. No wonder more and more experts predict a likely recession in the months ahead.
We're literally in the tightest labor market we have seen in decades, and at the same time, prices are really high.
All that recession talk brings to mind the pain many felt in the 1980s and again during the financial crisis in 2007-2008. But experts say a recession this time around is not supposed to be as deep. In fact, it might be the medicine that's needed.
To lower inflation, we need to create economic slack. So you need weaker growth. You need higher unemployment.
A recession would no doubt be bad for business. Mullen isn't too worried.
Sometimes it's a necessary evil that we have to have, just to make sure we all stay in our lane and stay in balance. And that's how you get nirvana.
A time to pause, he says, before the economy can start rolling again. Kyle Bax, CBC News, Calgary.
So now about those increasingly expensive trips to the grocery store. Well, a Canadian consumer watchdog has taken note. The Competition Bureau says it will study higher grocery prices and whether lack of competition is a factor. Anis Haidari has the details.
At this Toronto grocery store, shoppers know how painful prices can be.
The increase of the groceries nowadays have gone up too much for us to bear.
I mean, we've all noticed it. I just saw some things today that in the store that, you know, like I never thought would have been that price, but they are.
As prices go up, so is frustration. Now the Federal Competition Bureau is going to study the grocery industry, specifically whether more competitors would lower prices. But some in the business say retailers like Loblaw, Sobeys, and Metro already compete against each other fiercely.
I think it keeps them honest. They're fighting against each other. They're pushing really hard against the supplier community to not pass on price increases. They have very specific proofs, so you can't just say, I'd like to make more money.
Last week, MPs voted to ask the Competition Bureau to look at whether retailers' profit margins are going up too steeply. This study isn't that, and some industry experts echo what food producers say, that the issue is deeper than just how many grocery chains there are.
If I was undertaking an investigation of market power or anti-competitive behavior with the grocery stores, I would have included an investigation of the relationship between retailers and suppliers. That's not in there.
The Bureau actually isn't investigating anything. This is just a study with recommendations expected by next June. Small comfort for those paying higher prices right now.
They're always studying something and nothing ever changes, so, you know, big deal.
Any information the retailers provide to the Competition Bureau will be voluntary. So far, the major grocery retailers aren't speaking publicly. Anis Haidari, CBC News, Calgary.
Tonight, the legendary journalist Ann Medina is basking in a lot of sincere admiration after being inducted into the CBC News Hall of Fame.
Congratulations.
That happened at a ceremony where more than a few of us acknowledged Ann as a trailblazer for women reporting from conflict zones.
This is the front line of the Lebanese forces. We are near Aoun es Sidon, up in the snow-capped mountains overlooking the Bekaa Valley.
From Lebanon to Uganda to Bhopal, India, she went where the story was, and today she told us what that takes.
If you haven't got stamina, you will never make it. Second, a smile. And not a pretend smile. A smile that you mean. Whether you're talking to someone with, bullets draped over their chest, or a CEO in designer duds, or a woman in rags.
The last must-have for reporters, she said, is a cast-iron stomach, which is a fair point. Her honorary plaque calls Ann Medina a woman of influence who broke the ceiling many times over. That she did. Coming up next, with winter approaching fast, there are questions about where the pandemic could go from here.
The next 2 or 3 months are likely to be really challenging again.
Boy, experts say not to forget what we've learned so far. Plus, our team goes deep into the Amazon rainforest to meet the scientists trying to save it. That's coming up. But first, Diwali celebrations are in full swing across the country with sweet treats, vibrant colors, and music. The Festival of Lights, celebrated by Hindus, Sikhs, and Jains, takes place over 5 days, marks the triumph of light over darkness, good over evil. Heading into yet another pandemic winter, some cold facts to consider. COVID hospitalizations are up, vaccine uptake is down, and new variants are coming. Christine Birak looks at the months ahead and what you can do to prepare.
Heading into another pandemic winter, it's hard to predict the road ahead. But experts insist we could be navigating some really hard turns. While we can't see whether a brand new variant is around the corner, we do know hospitalizations are rising, new Omicron subvariants are spreading, and uptake of the latest booster is slow.
In healthcare terms, the next 2 or 3 months are likely to be really challenging again.
This is what it looks like inside Humber River Hospital and many other ERs right across the country.
It's one patient after one patient after one patient after another. It's kind of hard for us to take a break for a moment to pause.
Add to that, in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia saw one of its worst flu seasons in years. And the U.S. is already reporting an early surge in flu cases.
You're seeing a tidal wave sweeping across this country right now.
Here at home, the number of children landing in ERs sick with viral illnesses is already spiking. And of course, there's COVID. The number of Canadians now hospitalized with COVID-19 is around 4,000. That's almost twice as many as last year, 4 times more than in 2020.
If things going the way we're going, that there'd be more volume, more pressure on colleagues and nurses.
At the same time, new variants are emerging around the globe.
There are now new Omicron subvariants circulating that are more immune evasive, unfortunately, and potentially more transmissible.
Meaning new variants could drive new COVID waves as people move back indoors. Still, Canadians can avoid crowded emergency rooms by masking indoors, staying home when you're sick, and getting the latest booster. And Rasmussen and other experts insist provinces do not need to make people wait 6 months before getting their next shot.
If you can wait at least 4 months, essentially you're giving your immune system time to sort of absorb everything it learned during its last encounter with either a vaccine or the virus itself. And it's ready essentially to learn more about Omicron.
But experts insist if Canadians can slow down and remember what's been learned, we can safely navigate the pandemic road ahead. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
So there are always more questions when it comes to COVID, when it comes to a moment like this. So here to help us sort them out, infectious diseases specialist Dr. Susie Hoda. Thank you. Very nice to see you right here in person. Lots of worried doctors. Are you one of them?
Yes, I am concerned. Every year in the fall and the winter, we see a rise in admissions and hospital, and most of that's due to respiratory viruses and their complications. And this year, we've got COVID-19 circulating, and we've got other respiratory viruses that are going to make a comeback, likely. And so we don't really know what that's going to look like. We could see, them superimposed or one after the other. Regardless, it's likely to strain the system, and I worry about that in terms of access for patients.
If I'm sitting at home and I am worried, and I'm worried about kids in particular, which is the one to be most worried about, COVID or these respiratory viruses?
Well, the chances of encountering COVID are definitely higher right now because there's so much more of it than some of the other respiratory viruses at this moment. But when we're talking about children, it is important to recognize that most kids don't get too sick from COVID-19 unless they have underlying health conditions. Of course, that might be a special situation. We do know that influenza and respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, can cause serious illness in kids, and so I definitely watch out for that. The good news is we do have a vaccine for influenza, which is readily available to all Canadians in the fall. So,
okay, vaccines. Let's talk about those for a second. Christine said something interesting in the piece that booster uptake is low. What's happening there? Are people worried that the bivalent maybe doesn't deal with the variants enough? Is there an element of, I don't want to feel miserable for another day or two, I've had so many vaccines already?
I think there is an element of COVID vaccine fatigue that we're all struggling with, across the age groups. That said, I think it's so important for the point to come across that any booster dose that you would get is going to improve your chances of getting through a COVID-19 infection without getting seriously ill. And the bivalent vaccines are very safe. I have not seen any signals that have been concerning with them. They may not be a perfect match to what's circulating around right now, but your chances are greater, and we're seeing a lot more COVID-19 picking up. So now is a really important time for senior citizens who are seeing more COVID-19 again, and everyone to get up to date with their booster vaccines.
One last thought, hand washing. We didn't talk about it as much during the last couple years once it was established that COVID was largely airborne. Do we need to start talking about it again?
Absolutely. I mean, it should never have left the conversation, in my opinion. First of all, it's dangerous to just focus on one pathogen. There are other infections that have been rising through the pandemic, things like antibiotic-resistant organisms, and these are transmitted by contact. So hand washing is very important. But also other respiratory viruses outside of COVID-19, they're transmitted by respiratory route and through contact. And so it is important to continue keeping a focus on hand washing now and actually into the future.
All right, Dr. Hoda, so nice to see you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Brazil is set to choose a new president this weekend, and the future of the country's rainforest could be on the line.
And where are we?
We're right smack in the middle.
Coming up, Susan Ormiston and her team take us deep into the Amazon, where the stakes of that vote are everywhere you look. Plus, a growing industry that some say could lower costs and our impact on the environment inside Canada's biggest indoor farm. Tonight, we are taking you deep inside the Amazon for a closer look at a pressing issue in Brazil's presidential election campaign. What happens in next Sunday's vote could have a dramatic impact on the future of the rainforest. Our international climate correspondent, Susan Ormiston, shows us what's at stake.
We're climbing with a team of Amazonian scientists, passionate about the rainforest and worried about its future. It's early. It's about 6:30. We came here early to go up 40 meters to the top of this research tower, 220 steps, and we're going up to see something pretty spectacular.
To really understand its magnitude, you have to see the forest from above. And as the sun rises higher, that's where we're headed. A spectacular canopy. Before the day's heat, the flying rivers of mist, the green in many hues as far as you can see, the Amazon, 2/3 the size of Canada. These science warriors from the Institute of Amazonian Research and a conservation agency have been here dozens of times, but it's always a wonder. Botanist Beto Vincentini is our guide.
Every time you come to the forest, you'll see a different forest, right? There's so many shapes, forms, and the diversity is so high that you don't see the same species repeating itself very often in a forest like this.
Mario Cohn-Haft, a bird expert, came to the Amazon 30 years ago and never left.
That's the Amazon. That's the charm of the Amazon, the largest undisturbed tropical wilderness in the world.
Its beauty camouflages its critical role in regulating climate. These trees hold vast amounts of carbon dioxide, around 120 billion tons, so changes here will ricochet far away. We're pressing further in on a road barely passable. 40 kilometers takes about 2 hours. Way, researchers like that because when the road's hard to navigate, the logging trucks won't come. For them, this is an open lab, remote, unbroken forest. And at kilometer 41, we stop. Our destination for the next few days. You have to haul in all you need: water, food, hammocks, and then trek in. All you can carry. A rough path ends at a simple base camp.
Well, a kilometer in, and we're here, Camp 41.
Camp 41 was set up in the 70s to study what happens to the Amazon when it's cut out for ranches or farms. It's called fragmentation. The few outbuildings are plunked down, and they haven't changed much. But a lot of the inquiry now is how the forest will respond to the changing climate.
We got a map of the entire Amazon basin.
It's broad.
That's one big old Amazon you got there.
And where are we?
We're right smack in the middle. It's just a spectacular, enormous wilderness area with more species of everything you can imagine than anywhere else on Earth. The whole world depends on the Amazon rainforest staying intact. This forest is worth infinitely more as is.
Many people still believe in this country and elsewhere that you can take bits of this, you can fragment this forest, and it'll still be okay.
Well, you can in very small amounts, and we already have. The message really is we've already done that, and we can't go any further.
But pressures are rising fast in Brazil to clear more land. To the southeast, illegally set fires clear land for cattle or farming. At least 20% of the forest has been deforested. And under Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, development has soared. Ana Moraes is one of a cadre of young scientists sounding an alarm.
We come here weekly or bi-weekly
and gathering long-term data to discern how the forest will adapt to a changing climate.
It's very, very important to pay attention to it because the climate change is on a tipping point. So whatever we do to change to the better, it has to be done now. The deforestation here is growing very fast and is being backed up by the politicians, the president.
Do you worry what will happen with the election in Brazil coming up?
Absolutely. If Bolsonaro wins, I don't think there's a much brighter future for the Amazon forest. So we elevate the CO2.
Anna and the team are urgently trying to predict what could happen in the future forest. experimenting with carbon dioxide in this mini greenhouse.
So we are trying to understand how the elevation of the CO2 is going to work on the natural forest, on the tropical forest.
This work was started years ago. Down the road, a big, bold new project called the Amazon Face, laying the groundwork, digging foundations for huge towers which will reach beyond the canopy. The first should be up next month.
Eventually, 16 towers will go up here with their foundations in holes like these. In this part of the forest, they'll form a ring, and then scientists will pump in elevated levels of CO2, in effect mimicking what could happen in the future, maybe 20 years, but speeding up the process. Then they'll study what happens to the forest.
An array of towers.
Back at the National Institute of Amazonian Research, coordinator Carlos Alberto Casada tells us why this research is so critical.
You know, this very CO2 is changing the climate. It's making the plant hotter. Using models, we expect that these areas of the Amazon will become much drier and much hotter in the future. And this probably means that we may even lose the rainforest.
The Amazon hosts tens of thousands of unique species, 16,000 in trees alone, and 2/3 not yet categorized, says Vincentini. He's adamant on one point.
I don't see any reason why we should have any logging activity of tropical forests nowadays.
But you know the argument. The argument is, look, this is a huge forest. There's plenty of room.
Well, but if you have a lot of rarity, like we do, right? Tropical forests are complex, are very diverse. So species are not everywhere. And so you lose diversity. The species that remain there are not able to keep going. So you're bringing a lot of diversity to extinction.
For Beto and his fellow scientists, there's a clear choice. Tread lightly in the forest or risk irreversible damage. And at the end of our tour, we go back to the top for one more view of the world's largest rainforest, a marvel, as it silently waits for its fate.
Susan, some really striking images in your story. You know, there's so much to watch for in this runoff election next Sunday. I guess it's the second and final round. What's your sense of how split Brazil is heading into the vote?
Adrienne, the race is really tight still. It's tense. The incumbent Bolsonaro is trailing his rival, Luiz Inácio da Silva, or Lula as he's known, but the gap is apparently narrowing. And because the polls in the first round failed to capture the scope of Bolsonaro's appeal, his supporters and the president himself keep suggesting the vote could be rigged and pollsters are in on the fraud.
There we go again with that. A reminder for people again why this election is so consequential.
Well, it's just Brazilians are voting for the soul of their country. You know, Bolsonaro has polarized the country. He's been called the Trump of the tropics, and you see the divide everywhere and in the Amazon, caught up in that fierce tug of war between the far right and the left. So Sunday we'll know who triumphed, but don't expect a smooth result and do expect reaction potentially intense.
All right, Susan Ormiston in Washington, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have more ahead tonight on The National, including our moment.
Thank you, Miss O'Connell. I love you.
The emotional reunion between a student and her teacher takes flight. That's coming up. They are cropping up across the country, vertical farms that could offer Canadians a fresh, local source of produce year-round. Aaron Collins got a sneak peek at what will be one of the country's biggest indoor farms.
A new kind of farming on the rise. Crops grown not in fields, but in warehouses like this one.
We will generate almost 2 million pounds of leafy greens a year.
Once completed, this complex in Calgary will have more growing space than a soccer field. Along with a sister facility in Montreal, they'll be the largest in the country.
We grow with about 5% of the water used in open field farming. We grow with no pesticides, no herbicides, no fungicides. And we grow in about a third of the time of open field farming.
The hope is that vertical farming using hydroponics can grow cheaper, more sustainable food locally, something some experts say will need to happen as our climate changes, making importing most of our fruits and vegetables a problem.
There's not enough water in California. Climate change is going to make that system unviable over the next generation. So we're going to have to find alternatives.
But there are other benefits too. This vertical ag operation is going in at the base of the iconic Calgary Tower.
What are you going to be growing here?
Everything that we can think of, really. We got cherry tomatoes, regular Roma tomatoes, we got strawberries, herbs.
This entrepreneur wants to turn the third of Calgary's offices that sit vacant into farms.
Any space that is underutilized, vacant, looking for a solution, we're there to provide that and provide a benefit to the society.
Moving some farms from the country to the city, a way of reimagining urban life.
To have local produce grown in the building beside you, in the building where your restaurant is, or to be able to buy fresh produce in the morning if you're a downtown resident, it's fantastic.
Still, feeding Canadians from high rises remains a lofty goal.
Of course, there's a ceiling to how much of our food can be grown vertically. For now, things like potatoes, wheat, and rice have to be grown the old-fashioned way, on the ground. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
This is an interesting woman, airline worker Laura Caruso. She's used to helping folks board their flights, but what a smile this one brought, recognizing her favorite high school teacher, Ms. O'Connell. So both women were taken aback by this chance encounter. Laura's colleagues noticed and helped her give Ms. O'Connell some well-earned recognition, and that show of appreciation is our moment.
I'm gonna get emotional. But today I saw my teacher from 1990, Miss O'Connell, who's here on the board, on the aircraft, who is my favorite teacher ever. And I haven't seen her since 1990. This lady made me love Shakespeare, got me to play piano. I have my master's in piano and I can write an essay. Thank you, Miss O'Connell. I love you.
She was a little bit emotional because I recognized her and we both started crying. I was nervous at first because I didn't know if I was allowed to, but they were like, no, girl, go do it. So they pushed me to get on the aircraft and I said it.
You made my day today. I can tell you.
You made my life.
Oh, that's something.
I love you.
I love you too.
I'm going to email you. I had to hug her goodbye and I wanted her to know she had a huge impact in my life.
Tell the people who helped you that they helped you. This is lovely. She was nudged to do this by her friend, flight attendant Kiona Thrasher, who took that video. And, you know, I think everybody agrees good teachers deserve $1 bazillion a year. That is a national for October 24th. Thank you for being with us. Have a good night.